Hello. Let's begin this journey together. Settle in. Let the world outside fade away. Allow my voice to be a gentle guide as we step into the quiet, ordered world of Elias Thorne, a man who found solace in the precise language of maps, and who was about to discover that some maps lead to places not found on any conventional chart. The hum was the first thing I registered, as it always was in these assignments. Not a singular noise, but a symphony of distant overlapping resonances. The hushed roar of a jet engine spooling down miles away, the almost imperceptible thrum of the massive HVAC systems breathing life into the steel and glass behemoth that was Denver International Airport, the subtle rhythmic click-clack of an unseen maintenance cart traversing a distant corridor. To most, it would be background noise, easily dismissed. To me, Elias Thorne, GIS analyst and professional cartographer, it was the ambient heartbeat of a place, a foundational layer upon which I would build my understanding. My temporary office was a small, windowless room tucked away in the airport's sprawling underbelly, a space usually reserved for mid-level operations managers, I presumed. It smelled faintly of industrial cleaner and old coffee. Fluorescent lights, a little too bright, hummed their own quiet tune above me, reflecting off the oversized monitor that dominated my rented desk. On its screen, a complex tapestry of lines and polygons was slowly taking shape, the initial schematics of DIA's utility infrastructure. Water mains, electrical conduits, fiber optic cables, sewage lines, the hidden veins and arteries that kept this city-sized organism functioning. My task, as outlined by the rather blandly named Plains Infrastructure Consortium, was to digitize, verify, and update these existing records, integrating them with new survey data. Mundane, meticulous work, the kind I excelled at, the kind that usually allowed my mind to settle into a state of calm, focused flow. I've always found a profound comfort in the logic of spatial data. The world, to me, was a series of interconnected points, lines and polygons, each with attributes, each holding a piece of a larger, intricate puzzle. There was an inherent honesty to a well-drawn map, a clarity that real life, with its messy emotions and unpredictable variables, often lacked. People spoke of the romance of old, hand-drawn maps, of sea monsters in the margins and uncharted territories. I appreciated their artistry, of course, but my passion lay in the precision of the digital age, in the elegant algorithms that could reveal patterns and relationships invisible to the naked eye. The DIA project was on paper, straightforward, large, yes, complex, certainly, but nothing I hadn't encountered before in airports, industrial parks, or even small city grids. The initial data packets from the consortium were comprehensive architectural blueprints dating back to the airport's controversial construction, geological surveys, recent LiDAR scans, even some surprisingly detailed ground-penetrating radar, GPR logs. My job was to weave it all together into a seamless, multi-layered GIS database, a digital twin of the airport's hidden self. I began, as always, with the oldest records, the foundational layers, the original site surveys, before the first earth mover had scarred the prairie. I traced the contours, the subtle rises and falls of the land, feeling a connection to the surveyors who had walked these grounds decades ago, their instruments so much more rudimentary than mine, yet their purpose the same: to measure, to define, to understand. There was a meditative quality to this initial phase, a gentle immersion into the raw data. The cursor on my screen moved with deliberate slowness, guided by my hand on the puck, each click a small act of creation, of bringing order to the digital void. The stories about DIA, of course, were legendary. The New World Airport Commission dedication stone, the supposedly Freemasonic symbols, the terrifying murals depicting apocalyptic scenes, the rumors of vast underground bunkers, even the demonic blue Mustang statue, Blucifer, that had tragically killed its creator. I'd read them, of course, with the detached amusement of an academic encountering local folklore, entertaining fictions, perhaps, born from the airport's sheer scale, its isolated location, and its somewhat unsettling aesthetic. My work, I believed, dealt with facts, with verifiable measurements and concrete structures. The whispers and conspiracies were for late-night radio shows and internet forums, not for a serious cartographer. Yet, as the first few days bled into a week, as I delved deeper into the interwoven layers of data, a subtle disquiet began to prick at the edges of my carefully ordered mind. It wasn't anything overt, nothing I could pinpoint and label as wrong. Not yet. It was more a feeling, an intuition born from years of staring at such data sets. Small discrepancies, like faint echoes in the data, a utility line that seemed to deviate from its most logical path for no apparent reason. A GPR shadow in an area that should have been solid Earth, according to the geological surveys. Tiny things. The kind of anomalies that were often just errors in old records, ghosts in the machine. I made notes, flagged them for closer inspection, and continued my methodical work, the hum of the airport a constant soothing presence. Or so I tried to tell myself. The air in my small office always felt a little too still, the silence between the hums a little too profound. I found myself, more than once, pausing my work and just listening, trying to parse the complex symphony of the airport's hidden life, wondering if there were other, fainter melodies playing beneath the ones I could readily identify. The thought was uncharacteristic, a flicker of something almost fanciful. I dismissed it, attributing it to the late hours, the recycled air, the inherent isolation of the task. I was a man of data, of logic, and the data, so far, was still behaving. Mostly, the whispers would have to remain outside my carefully constructed digital walls. The rhythm of my days settled into a predictable pattern, dictated by the quiet hum of the servers and the soft glow of my monitor. I'd arrive in the pre-dawn stillness, the vast terminals hushed and nearly empty, their cavernous spaces amplifying the sound of my own footsteps on the polished floors. I'd nod to the occasional security guard or cleaning crew member, solitary figures like myself, each tending to their own part of the sleeping giant. Then, the descent into my subterranean workspace, the click of the door sealing out even the muted sounds of the airport above, leaving me in my cocoon of data and fluorescent light. My focus remained on the foundational layers, the deep utilities, the bedrock geology. It was here, in the oldest strata of information, that the first persistent whispers of anomaly began to coalesce. That GPR shadow I'd noted earlier, the one in section Gamma 7 of the subterranean schematics, north of the main terminal, refused to resolve. The geological surveys indicated undisturbed shale at that depth. The original construction plans showed no excavation, no backfill. Yet the GPR return was undeniably there, a void, or at least a significant density change, roughly rectangular, stretching for nearly 50 meters, too regular for a natural cavern, too large for a forgotten septic tank. I cross-referenced it with every available data set. Thermal imaging showed no significant temperature differential, ruling out active machinery or geothermal activity. Seismic logs from the airport's construction phase, though crude by modern standards, showed no blasting or unusual excavation in that precise quadrant. It was a ghost in the data, a subtle but insistent contradiction. I spent an entire morning trying to reconcile it, running different filtering algorithms on the GPR data, convinced it was an artifact, a misinterpretation. But the void remained, a dark patch on my glowing screen, like a missing tooth in an otherwise perfect smile. Then, there were the utility lines. Specifically, a primary water main that fed the western concourses. According to the original engineering plans, its route should have been a straight shot from the main reservoir feed. Yet, the as-built schematics later confirmed by my own analysis of recent remote sensing data, showed a distinct, almost deliberate detour, a curve that added nearly 100 meters to its length, circumnavigating the very area of that GPR anomaly in Gamma 7. No geological obstructions were noted in the plans that would necessitate such a deviation. No other utility lines occupied the more direct path. It was inefficient. It was, from a purely engineering standpoint, illogical. I zoomed in on the junction points, the access manifolds. The notes were sparse. Revised route per addendum 7.3b. I hunted for addendum 7.3b. It was missing from the digital archives, and the physical records office, after a day of searching, reported it as archived off-site, potentially lost. Lost, a critical addendum for a primary utility line in an international airport. Possible, certainly. Budgets were cut, archives mismanaged, but it felt convenient. Another small thread, leading nowhere definitive, yet adding to a subtle tapestry of unease. My sleep, usually deep and untroubled, began to be visited by strange geometric dreams, endless corridors of data, lines that shifted and reformed, voids that pulsed with a silent, unseen energy. I would wake in the sterile quiet of my temporary lodgings, a corporate apartment not far from the airport, with the hum of my own computer, left on to process data sets, echoing the deeper hum of DIA itself. During my lunch breaks, I sometimes wandered the public areas of the airport, trying to clear my head. I'd find myself staring at the infamous murals, their chaotic energy and disturbing imagery, a stark contrast to the clean, orderly lines of my digital world. Before I dismissed them as merely provocative art, now I found myself tracing the strange, swirling lines within them, the distorted perspectives, the hidden faces. Were there patterns here too? Messages encoded in the chaos. The thought felt alien, a betrayal of my rational mind, yet it lingered. I found myself particularly drawn to one panel, the one depicting great fiery destruction, but also a convergence of people towards a glowing, almost plant-like structure. The lines in that structure, they reminded me of something: the branching pathways of a data network, the complex root system of an ancient tree. I even found myself, one quiet afternoon, standing on the elevated walkway that led to the Jeppesen terminal, looking out towards the plains where the colossal blue Mustang statue, Blucifer, reared against the vast Colorado sky. Its demonic red eyes, unlit during the day, seemed to hold a latent fire. I'd read about its troubled creation, the artist Luis Jimenez's tragic death, when a section of the statue fell on him, a freak accident, the official report stated. But standing there, feeling the almost imperceptible vibration of the airport beneath my feet, a different thought, unwelcome and irrational, surfaced. What if the ground itself, this specific patch of earth, was somehow resistant to being tamed, to being mapped and ordered? What if the statue wasn't just cursed, but a focal point for something older, something that resented the imposition of concrete and steel above it? I shook my head, trying to dispel the creeping sense of something I couldn't name. This was what happened when one spent too much time alone, staring at screens in a windowless room. Fatigue, stress, an overactive imagination. I needed to stick to the facts, to the data, the GPR void, the rerouted water main, the missing addendum. These were explainable. Eventually, there would be logical reasons. There always were. Yet, as I returned to my subterranean office, the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed a little louder, the shadows in the corners of the room a little deeper, and the void in section Gamma 7 on my screen seemed to be watching me with a patient, silent intensity. The airport was beginning to feel less like a machine and more like a sleeping entity, its secrets buried deep beneath the surface, waiting. And I, with my maps and my data, was unintentionally, perhaps, beginning to nudge it awake. The following days saw me delve into the more recent datasets, LiDAR scans that offered millimeter precision, thermal imaging overlays, even acoustic surveys that had been conducted to monitor noise pollution. Each new layer of information was meant to bring clarity, to solidify the known. Instead, they seemed to amplify the inconsistencies. The GPR void in Gamma 7, for instance, was not an isolated incident. As I expanded my search parameters, applying more sensitive filters to the raw GPR data across wider sections of the airport grounds, similar smaller anomalies began to appear. Pockets of unexpectedly low density, often arranged in peculiar, almost geometric alignments, like beads on an invisible string, forming subtle lines that radiated outwards from the central terminal complex, some even extending beyond the airport's official perimeter into the vast undeveloped plains. These weren't large enough to be undocumented bunkers or forgotten utility tunnels, not in the conventional sense. They were more like capillaries, tiny deviations in the Earth's natural strata, too regular to be entirely natural, too faint to have triggered alarm in previous less detailed surveys. My software, designed to identify and flag discrepancies, was working overtime, its logs filling with entries that I had to manually categorize as low-confidence anomaly, requires further investigation. My carefully ordered digital world was becoming increasingly peppered with these little flags of uncertainty. It was during one of these deep dives, tracing a faint GPR signature that seemed to connect two larger, previously dismissed density variations, that I noticed something else. I was looking at the architectural plans for the floor tiling in Concourse Bay, a vast expanse of polished granite. The official design documents described the patterns as purely aesthetic, inspired by regional motifs. I'd never paid them much mind. But now, with the ghostly outline of this subterranean GPR line still translucent on my screen, overlaid on the concourse schematics, a section of the floor pattern seemed to echo it. Not directly, not obviously, but in its flow, its subtle directional emphasis. A series of diamond shapes, innocent enough on their own, were arranged in a way that subtly guided the eye along the same axis as the underground anomaly. Dismissing it as coincidence, I nevertheless felt a strange compulsion. I pulled up the design specifications for other public areas. The Great Hall, Concourse A, Concourse C. I began to look at the floor patterns, the wall inlays, even the placement of certain large-scale art installations, not as decorative choices, but as potential markers. It felt absurd, like seeing faces in clouds or finding secret messages in song lyrics played backward. This was the kind of thinking I'd always derided. Pareidolia, the mind's tendency to impose patterns on random data. And yet, the more I looked, the more I saw. A starburst motif in a terrazzo floor, directly above a nexus point where several of my faint GPR lines converged. A series of brushed steel panels on a wall, their seemingly random spacing mirroring the length and orientation of another subterranean anomaly. The way certain light fixtures were angled, casting shadows that subtly emphasized a particular direction of travel down a long corridor, a direction that, when I checked my GIS layers, corresponded to yet another of these faint, deep lines. These were not the overt, almost cartoonish symbols of conspiracy forums, no all-seeing eyes or obvious Masonic compasses. These were far more subtle, woven into the very fabric of the airport's design, hidden in plain sight, visible only if you knew, or perhaps suspected, what to look for. And even then, it was deniable. Each instance, taken alone, was easily dismissed, but taken together, they formed a quiet, persistent whisper. This was when the first true aha moment began to crystallize, not as a sudden flash, but as a slow, dawning realization, like watching a photograph develop in a dark room. I was sitting back in my chair, staring at a particularly complex overlay on my screen. It showed a section of the airport's exterior landscaping, berms, drainage channels, access roads, interspersed with. These were the faint traces of my GPR lines. And overlaid on that, I had, on a whim, activated a layer showing historical aerial photographs from before the airport was built. Old ranch land, mostly featureless prairie. But there, in one of the older, grainier photos, I saw it, a faint, almost imperceptible discoloration in the soil, a subtle variation in the prairie grass. It formed a long, gentle curve. It was a feature that wouldn't have meant anything to the original land surveyors, easily dismissed as a natural variation, a trick of the light. But on my screen, it aligned perfectly with one of the more prominent GPR lines I had been tracing beneath the modern airport. And then the memory surfaced, unbidden, from the recesses of my childhood. My grandmother, not the one who collected spirit rocks, but my father's mother, a stern, pragmatic woman, a farmer's wife. She had an old saying for when the weather was about to change, or when she felt a storm was brewing long before the clouds appeared. "The land remembers," she'd say, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "The old ways, the old paths. Even when we build over them, the land remembers." I'd always thought it was just folklore, a poetic turn of phrase. But looking at that screen, at the faint trace on an old photograph aligning with a modern technological anomaly beneath tons of concrete and steel, her words took on a new, chilling resonance. The land remembers. What if these weren't just random anomalies? What if they were echoes of something ancient, something imprinted onto the landscape itself, and the airport, either by accident or by some forgotten design, had been built in dialogue with these echoes? The implications were vast and deeply unsettling to my ordered, rational mind. This wasn't about secret bunkers for a shadowy elite, or alien landing strips. This felt older, stranger. It hinted at a layer of reality I had never considered, a subtle energetic framework to the world, one that perhaps certain people, certain societies, had known how to read, how to utilize, and the airport, this monumental piece of modern engineering, might be unwittingly, or wittingly, interacting with it. My small office suddenly felt much larger. The hum of the airport outside its door, no longer just the sound of machinery, but something more resonant. The sky outside, which I couldn't see, felt immense, charged with unseen currents. And I, Elias Thorne, cartographer of the mundane, felt myself standing on the precipice of an entirely new kind of map, one whose coordinates were not yet written, whose legend was terrifyingly blank. The land remembers. The phrase became a quiet mantra in my mind, echoing in the stillness of my subterranean office. It shifted my perception, subtly but profoundly. I was no longer just looking for errors in blueprints or unexplained voids in the earth. I was searching for echoes, for whispers of a forgotten language spoken by the landscape itself. My methodology became unorthodox. I started paying less attention to the official engineering addenda and more to the subtle deviations, the seemingly irrational choices in design and construction. I began to spend more of my break times, not in the sterile canteen, but walking the terminals, my gaze no longer casual, but searching. I carried a small, discreet notebook, sketching not just the floor patterns or the angles of light, but also noting the ambient temperature changes, the subtle acoustic variations, even the way the air seemed to flow in certain sections. I probably looked like an eccentric, a man lost in his own peculiar observations, but the few airport employees who noticed me were too busy with their own tasks to pay much mind. DIA was a world unto itself, populated by thousands, yet vast enough for an individual to become almost invisible if they chose. It was during one of these observational walks, in a quieter, less frequented corridor connecting Concourse B to the baggage claim area, that I first truly noticed him. The janitor. I'd seen him before, of course, a peripheral figure in the airport's constant, low-level activity. He was old, wiry, with skin like tanned leather and eyes that seemed to hold a quiet, knowing stillness. He moved with a slow, deliberate economy, his cleaning cart gliding almost silently beside him. Most staff barely glanced at him. He was part of the airport's invisible machinery. But that day, as I paused to examine a series of oddly placed ventilation grills that seemed to align with one of my lines of interest, I saw him stop his work nearby. He wasn't looking at me directly, but I felt his awareness. He polished a section of handrail with meticulous care, his movements unhurried. Then, as he moved on, his gaze flickered towards the grills I had been studying. Then briefly, almost imperceptibly, down to the floor, tracing a line with his eyes that only I, with my mental map of subterranean anomalies, would have recognized. He said nothing. He simply continued his slow progress down the corridor, disappearing around a corner. A coincidence, I told myself. I was projecting. My mind, now primed to see patterns, was finding them everywhere, even in the casual glance of an elderly janitor. And yet, the encounter left a residue, a faint question mark. My official task, the GIS mapping for the Planes Infrastructure Consortium, was still progressing, but my true focus had shifted. I found myself working late into the night, driven by a quiet obsession. I started cross-referencing my DIA anomalies with much older data, historical maps of Native American trails, accounts from early settlers, even folkloric tales of the region that spoke of sacred grounds and lines of power. Most of it was fragmentary, anecdotal, easily dismissed by a purely scientific mind. But my scientific mind was slowly, reluctantly, making room for other possibilities. One evening, I was tracing a particularly prominent GPR line that ran directly beneath the Great Hall, passing almost precisely under the controversial dedication capstone with its New World Airport Commission inscription. On my screen, the line pulsed faintly as I applied different visualization filters. I zoomed in on the capstone's reported location. The official schematics showed nothing beneath it but standard foundation work. But my GPR data, faint as it was, suggested a subtle density variation, a hollowness that was just on the threshold of detectability. It was then, as I stared at the screen, feeling the familiar hum of the airport around me, that I noticed a small folded piece of paper tucked into the ventilation slit of my office computer's tower. It hadn't been there when I'd returned from my last terminal walk. My heart gave a small, almost painful thump. I rarely locked my office. It was in a secure area, and I was usually the last to leave this particular sublevel. With a sense of trepidation, I carefully unfolded it. It wasn't a note, not in words. It was a sketch, crudely drawn in blue ballpoint pen on a piece of what looked like a discarded work order. It depicted a simple spiral, like a nautilus shell, with a single straight line bisecting it. Beneath the spiral, there was a small arrow-like symbol pointing downwards. My mind raced. A prank? A misplaced doodle? But the precision of its placement, tucked into my computer as if meant only for me, felt deliberate. The spiral, I'd seen similar motifs in some of the more obscure academic papers I'd been unearthing about ancient earth energies and sacred geometry. The line bisecting it, and the arrow pointing down. I looked back at my screen, at the GPR line running beneath the Great Hall, the capstone, the faint hollowness. Could this crude sketch be a map, a hint? My gaze drifted to the door of my office. I listened intently. The usual distant hums. Nothing more. Whoever had left it was long gone. But the image of the old janitor, his quiet movements, his knowing eyes, flashed in my mind. It was impossible, of course. Too much of a leap. And yet, I saved the sketch, tucking it carefully into my notebook. It was another piece of the puzzle, another whisper. But this one felt different. It wasn't from the land, or from the data. It felt like a message, a nudge from a human hand, guiding me further down this strange, uncharted path. The airport, it seemed, had more than just subterranean secrets. It had silent observers, perhaps even guardians, of its deeper mysteries. And one of them, it appeared, had just acknowledged my presence. The thought was both thrilling and deeply unnerving. The quiet hum of the servers around me seemed to deepen, to resonate with a new, more personal significance. The crude sketch on the discarded work order became a focal point of my late-night analyses, a spiral bisected by a line, an arrow pointing downwards. It was so simple, yet it felt dense with meaning. I couldn't quite grasp. I pinned it to the small corkboard above my desk, alongside printouts of some of the more persistent GPR anomalies and architectural details that echoed them. It looked like the beginnings of a madman's collage, a web of disparate clues, seeking a connecting thread. I tried to approach it logically, as I would any cartographic symbol. A spiral often represented a vortex, a convergence, or a journey inward. The bisecting line could mean a path, an axis, or a division. The downward arrow was the most straightforward. Depth, descent, something beneath. Beneath what? Beneath the capstone in the Great Hall, where my GPR data hinted at that subtle hollowness, was the spiral, a representation of the Great Hall itself, or the energy field I was beginning to suspect lay centered there. My work for the Plains Infrastructure Consortium continued, albeit with a growing sense of dual purpose. During the day, I diligently processed their datasets, attended virtual progress meetings where I presented sanitized versions of my findings, carefully omitting the anomalies that consumed my private hours. I was building two maps, the official, sterile GIS model they paid for, and my own, a shadow map, filled with conjectures, questions, and faint, shimmering lines of energy that only I could see. I started to pay more careful attention to the old janitor. I learned his roots, his routines. He was a creature of habit, his presence as regular and predictable as the phased dimming of the terminal lights in the deep hours of the night. I never approached him directly about the sketch. The risk felt too great. What would I say? "Excuse me, did you happen to leave an esoteric drawing in my computer?" The absurdity of it was a shield. Instead, I observed, I'd leave my office door slightly ajar when I knew he was due to pass, my screen angled to show some innocuous schematic, but my senses alert. He never deviated from his path, never glanced in. His face remained impassive, his movements economical and serene. If he was the sender, he was a master of subtlety. One afternoon, I was in the Great Hall itself, ostensibly checking ground-level GPS references, but actually studying the capstone. It was a large, polished granite slab, flush with the floor, its inscription clear and deeply etched, New World Airport Commission, alongside the names of various Masonic bodies and other contributors. It was in itself unremarkable, if not for the persistent rumors and my own nagging GPR data. As I knelt, pretending to adjust a small tripod, I felt a presence nearby. It was him, the janitor, slowly sweeping the floor a dozen yards away, his back to me. He paused, very briefly, his broom still, then continued his sweeping rhythm, moving away. But in that pause, I heard it, a faint, almost inaudible hum, seemingly coming from the floor around the capstone. I'd heard it before, attributed it to the vast HVAC system, but this time, linked with the janitor's momentary stillness, it felt different, more localized, more significant. Later that week, another small offering appeared. This time, it wasn't a sketch, but an object, tucked beside the wheel of my office chair, so small I almost missed it, was a tiny, perfectly formed fossil, an ammonite, its spiral shape, an exact echo of the drawing. It was cold to the touch, smooth and ancient. Where could he have possibly found something like this, within the sterile confines of DIA? The plains around the airport were known for Cretaceous fossils, but to bring one in, to leave it so deliberately, the ammonite felt like a key, or at least a confirmation. Spirals, ancient life, the land remembering, the janitor, if it was indeed him, wasn't just leaving clues, he was teaching me a new language, a symbolic vocabulary for the hidden world he seemed to inhabit so comfortably. My focus narrowed on the area around the Great Hall capstone. If the downward arrow meant descent, and the spiral was connected to this location, then there had to be an access point, something the official blueprints didn't show, something my GPR could only hint at. I began to meticulously re-examine every piece of data related to that specific zone: maintenance shafts, emergency exits, old construction photos, even drainage system layouts, anything that might betray an unrecorded entrance or a hidden chamber. The stress of this dual existence, this silent obsessive quest, began to wear on me, yet it was coupled with a strange exhilaration. The world felt thinner, more permeable. The mundane surfaces of the airport, the polished floors, the steel girders, the endless corridors seemed to shimmer with a hidden potential, with layers of meaning I was only just beginning to perceive. My dreams were no longer just of shifting geometric lines, but of vast, silent underground spaces, of slow tectonic movements, of the earth breathing. I even began to wonder about Blucifer. The demonic mustang, with its glowing red eyes, stood sentinel outside. My lines of interest seemed to bypass it, yet it felt like a crucial piece of the puzzle, a loud, defiant exclamation mark on the landscape. The official story was that its eyes were lit by LEDs, a tribute to its artist. But late one night, as I was leaving the airport, a fierce electrical storm was gathering over the plains. A bolt of lightning illuminated the distant statue for a split second, and in that flash, its eyes seemed to burn with an internal, malevolent crimson light that was more than just reflected electricity. It felt alive. A guardian, perhaps, as my initial theory suggested, but a guardian of what, and for whom? Was it connected to the subtle energies I was mapping, or was it something else entirely? A different layer of DIA's enigma. The ammonite sat on my desk, its ancient spiral, a constant reminder. The airport was a palimpsest, layers of history and secrets written one atop the other, and I, Elias Thorne, was slowly learning to read between the lines. The next step, I knew, was to find the place the arrow pointed to. The ammonite on my desk seemed to hum with a silent energy of its own, its petrified spiral, a constant reminder of the depths I was plumbing, both literally and figuratively. My search for an access point near the Great Hall capstone became an all-consuming, though necessarily discreet, endeavor. I pored over revised blueprints, cross-referencing them with maintenance schedules and security patrol routes. Any undocumented gap, any period of low surveillance, any forgotten access panel noted in an old work order became a point of intense focus. The janitor remained an elusive presence. I'd see him on his rounds, a silent, knowing figure moving through the airport's arteries. Our unspoken communication continued through these subtle offerings. One morning, I found a small, perfectly symmetrical bird feather placed on top of my keyboard. It was a deep iridescent blue, almost the exact shade of Blucifer's hide. There were no bird roosts I knew of inside the terminals. It was another impossible little token, another piece of the symbolic language he seemed to be teaching me. Spirals of the earth, feathers of the sky. He was showing me connections, bridging elements. My official reports to the Plains Infrastructure Consortium grew more perfunctory. I provided them with the data they required, clean and unambiguous, stripped of the spectral lines and resonant echoes that now filled my private maps. I felt like a cartographer of two worlds, one of sunlit, anodyne efficiency, and another of shadowed, ancient mystery. The strain of this duality was beginning to show. I was sleeping less, eating erratically, my thoughts constantly circling back to the enigma beneath the airport. Yet it wasn't an agitated state, rather it was one of profound, almost meditative absorption. The world outside this puzzle seemed to fade, its noises distant and irrelevant. In the third closet along, behind a stack of faded promotional posters for a long-past winter festival, I found it. It wasn't a door, not in the conventional sense. It was a section of the concrete block wall, where the mortar was a slightly different color, a patch about a meter square, that when I pressed against it, felt subtly hollow. There were no hinges, no handles, but running my fingers along the edges, I detected faint, almost invisible seams. It was a sealed panel, designed to be indistinguishable from the rest of the wall. My search for the entrance near the capstone eventually led me to a series of rarely used utility closets tucked away behind a temporary exhibition space in the Great Hall. The airport was a constantly shifting organism, with retail spaces and displays frequently changing. This particular area was currently cordoned off for renovation, meaning fewer prying eyes. According to one particularly archaic schematic from the earliest phase of construction, a blueprint so old it was on actual blue paper, brittle and faded. One of these closets backed onto a section of foundational wall that my GPR data suggested was unusually thin, almost like a sealed-off passage. Under the guise of verifying some obscure electrical conduit routings for the consortium, I managed to gain legitimate access to this dusty, forgotten row of closets. They were filled with discarded signage, broken cleaning equipment, and the detritus of forgotten airport events. The air was thick with the smell of old particle board and stale air. That night, I could barely concentrate on my official duties. The knowledge of that sealed panel, that hidden way, hummed in my mind with an intensity that overshadowed even the constant thrum of the airport. The ammonite on my desk seemed to gleam in the lamplight, its spiral a beckoning invitation. The blue feather lay beside it, a promise of flight, or perhaps a warning of the heights, or depths, involved. I didn't dare try to open it then. I had no tools, and the risk of discovery was too high, even in this forgotten corner. But knowing it was there changed everything. The abstract lines on my screen, the faint GPR shadows, had resolved into a tangible reality, a threshold. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic bird. This had to be it. The downward arrow, the place the janitor's clues, the land's whispers, and my own obsessive data mining had led me. I thought about the janitor. Was he aware of my discovery? Was this the path he had intended for me to find? His silence, his inscrutability, was both a guide and a profound weight. He had offered no explicit instructions, no warnings, only these enigmatic symbols, these quiet nudges towards the unknown. As I packed up to leave, a wave of profound weariness washed over me, quickly followed by a strange sense of calm. The airport outside my small office seemed to breathe with me. The hum of its machinery felt like a vast, rhythmic exhalation. I was a part of its hidden workings now, a tiny cog in a machine far grander and more ancient than I could have ever conceived. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overlaid with a compelling, almost serene curiosity. I was a cartographer, on the edge of an uncharted territory, and the only way forward was to step across the border. The panel in the dusty closet was that border, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would return to cross it. The map was calling me. The decision to return to the hidden panel wasn't a dramatic thunderclap moment. Rather, it settled upon me with the quiet inevitability of dusk. For 2 days, I went about my official tasks with a detached precision, the knowledge of that sealed threshold a constant humming undertone beneath my ordinary routine. I gathered a few simple tools from the airport's sprawling maintenance stores, a sturdy pry bar, a powerful flashlight, a pair of thick work gloves, signing them out under the pretext of needing to inspect a difficult-to-reach junction box. No one questioned me. In the labyrinthine bureaucracy of Dai, small requisitions like these were grains of sand on a vast beach. I chose a night when the airport was at its quietest, a dead slot in the flight schedules between the last international departures and the first stirrings of the cargo haulers. The corridors were hushed, the lights dimmed to their nocturnal settings, casting long, soft shadows. The air itself felt heavy with sleep, or perhaps with the collective unconscious of the thousands who had passed through these halls, leaving faint psychic residues in their wake. My journey to the cordoned-off renovation area near the Great Hall was uneventful. The temporary barriers were still in place, the silence behind them profound. I slipped into the row of utility closets, my soft-soled shoes making no sound on the concrete floor. The air was still, cool, and carried the faint, earthy scent I'd noticed before, now stronger, as if seeping from the very walls. In the third closet, behind the faded posters, the sealed panel awaited. In the focused beam of my flashlight, the faint seams around its edges were more visible. I took a deep, calming breath, the kind I used to do before a complex data presentation, and set to work. The pry bar, inserted carefully into a barely perceptible crack, met resistance. I applied steady pressure, not wanting to make any loud noises. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a faint grating sound, like stone on stone, the seal broke. A puff of air, surprisingly cool, and carrying that same earthy, almost sweet scent, escaped from within. The panel wasn't hinged. It was a solid plug, perhaps a meter thick, designed to be slid out. It was heavy, but with leverage, it moved, groaning softly in protest. I managed to shift it just enough to create an opening, a dark sliver barely wide enough for me to squeeze through. Shining my flashlight into the gap, I saw not a utility chase or a forgotten storage space, but the beginning of a narrow, downward-sloping passage. The walls were not concrete block, but something older, smoother, almost like dressed stone, though it was hard to tell in the narrow beam. It was undeniably ancient, or at least constructed to appear so. The air that flowed from it was cool, fresh, and strangely vibrant. It didn't feel like stale, trapped air. It felt alive. My heart was a steady drum now, a rhythm of anticipation rather than fear. This was it. The map had led me here. The whispers, the symbols, the faint lines on my screen, they had all converged on this dark opening. I squeezed through the gap, the rough stone cool against my jacket. The panel slid partially back with a soft thud behind me, not sealing completely, but plunging the passage into near total darkness. Save for the beam of my flashlight, I was in. The passage was barely shoulder width, its ceiling just high enough for me to stand upright. It descended at a gentle, consistent gradient. The floor was smooth, slightly concave, as if worn down by the passage of something over a very long time. The silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the constant, distant hum of the airport I had left behind. Here, the only sound was my own soft breathing and the whisper of my clothes as I moved. As I walked, my flashlight beam played over the walls. They were indeed stone, of a type I didn't recognize, dark and seamless, with no obvious mortar lines. Occasionally, I saw faint, almost invisible etchings, not letters or recognizable symbols, but geometric patterns, spirals that echoed the ammonite, intersecting lines, patterns that seemed to resonate with the subtle energy lines I had been mapping on the surface. They were so faint, they could easily be missed, visible only when the light caught them at precisely the right angle. The air grew cooler. Yet it wasn't an uncomfortable cold. It felt pure, and the earthy scent intensified, now mingled with something else, a faint, almost metallic tang, like the air after a thunderstorm. I had no sense of how far I had walked, or how deep I had gone. Time itself seemed to stretch and dilate in this silent, timeless place. My mind, the mind of Elias Thorne, the logical cartographer, struggled to process the reality of it. This place shouldn't exist. It wasn't on any blueprint, not in any survey. It was a secret heart beneath the modern behemoth of DIA, a hidden stratum of an older, stranger world. The New World Airport Commission. Was this their new world? Or was it a world they had merely rediscovered, an ancient legacy they were trying to understand or control? The passage began to widen slightly, and I sensed a larger space ahead. The faint metallic tang in the air grew stronger, and then I heard it. A sound, so faint. At first I thought it was the blood rushing in my ears, but it grew, a deep, resonant hum, far below the threshold of normal hearing, yet I felt it in my chest, in the bones of my skull. It was the sound I had sometimes detected with my most sensitive equipment, the sound that seemed to emanate from the earth itself, the sound I had begun to associate with the very lines I was tracing. Here, in this hidden place, it was undeniably real, a silent song of the deep. The map had led me to its source. The narrow passage opened out, not abruptly, but with a gradual widening, like a throat opening into a vast lung. The resonant hum intensified, no longer just a vibration in my bones, but a tangible presence in the air, making the fine hairs on my arms stand on end. It wasn't a threatening sound. It was more like the purr of some colossal sleeping creature, a sound of immense latent power held in perfect equilibrium. I stepped into a vast, circular chamber. My flashlight beam, though powerful, struggled to illuminate its full extent. The ceiling soared upwards into darkness, far beyond the reach of my light, giving the impression of being under a subterranean sky. The walls were of the same dark, seamless stone as the passage, curving away into the gloom, and in the center of this immense space, directly beneath where I estimated the Great Hall capstone would be far above, stood a structure unlike anything I could have imagined. It wasn't a machine in any conventional sense, nor was it a natural formation. It was a pillar, perhaps 10 meters in diameter, rising from the stone floor and disappearing into the darkness above. It seemed to be composed of a crystalline material, faintly luminous, with an inner light that pulsed in slow, rhythmic synchrony with the deep hum that filled the chamber. The surface of the pillar was covered in the same faint, intricate geometric etchings I had seen in the passage, but here they were more complex, more densely interwoven, forming a tapestry of spirals, lattices, and radiating lines that seemed to shift and change as the internal light waxed and waned. The air around the pillar shimmered, like heat haze on a summer road, and the metallic tang was stronger here, clean and sharp. I felt a strange lightness, a sense of mental clarity I hadn't experienced in years. My persistent, low-level tinnitus, which had become a constant companion, was gone. In its place was only the profound, all-encompassing hum of the chamber. I walked slowly towards the central pillar, my footsteps making no echo in the vastness, absorbed by the resonant frequency of the space. As I drew closer, I could see that the pillar was not entirely solid. There were deep fissures and channels within its crystalline structure, through which the internal light flowed like a slow-moving river of luminescence. It looked impossibly ancient, yet perfectly preserved, a testament to a science or an art beyond my comprehension. Scattered around the base of the pillar, on the smooth stone floor, were objects that looked like offering bowls, crafted from the same dark stone as the walls. Most were empty, covered in a fine layer of dust. But in one, I saw a collection of small, perfectly formed ammonite fossils, identical to the one the janitor had left for me. In another, a handful of iridescent blue feathers. My guide, it seemed, was not just leading me, but was also a tender of this sacred hidden place. It was then, as my light swept across the floor near the pillar's base, that I saw something else. Not ancient, not symbolic, but starkly modern. A small metallic plaque, almost hidden in the shadows, affixed to a subtly raised section of the stone floor. I knelt closer, my heart suddenly quickening with a different kind of apprehension. The plaque was new, made of brushed stainless steel. Engraved on it were a few simple lines of text. At the top, a familiar logo. The stylized compass rose of the Plains Infrastructure Consortium, my employers. Beneath it, a date from only a few years prior, and a single line, Phase 1, Resonance Calibration, Project Chimera. Project Chimera. Resonance. Calibration. My mind reeled. The consortium, they weren't just interested in mundane utility mapping. The anomalies I had been meticulously correcting, or flagging for further low-priority investigation in their official datasets, they weren't errors to them. They were signposts. My meticulous, systematic approach, my ability to discern subtle patterns in vast datasets, I hadn't been hired to update their infrastructure maps. I had been hired, unwittingly, to refine their map of this, to help them calibrate their understanding of this ancient energetic system. The realization washed over me, not with anger, but with a profound, chilling clarity. My aha moment on the surface, connecting the airport's design to the land's memory, was a discovery they had likely already made, or at least strongly suspected. My role was to provide the granular detail, the precise coordinates, the subtle correlations they needed to move to their Phase 2, whatever that might entail. The janitor, was he part of their project, a knowing, complicit operative, or was he, like me, until this moment, an unwitting pawn, or perhaps something else entirely, a dissenting voice trying to guide me towards a truth the consortium preferred to keep obscured? His offerings, the ammonite, the feather, the sketch, they felt personal, like attempts to awaken a deeper understanding, not just to fulfill a corporate directive. I looked back at the luminous humming pillar, its ancient wisdom suddenly juxtaposed with the cold, calculating ambition of my employers. This place, this sacred resonant heart beneath the airport, wasn't just a scientific curiosity to them, it was a project, an asset. The gentle, immersive quality of the chamber suddenly felt fragile. The profound peace I had felt was now tinged with a deep unease. The land remembers, my grandmother had said. But what happened when modern ambition tried to exploit those ancient memories, to harness those deep telluric energies for purposes unknown? The hum of the pillar continued its timeless song, but now I heard a new dissonant note within it, the whisper of human interference, of Project Chimera. My journey as a cartographer had taken an even stranger, more perilous turn. I was no longer just mapping the unseen. I was mapping the intentions of those who sought to control it. The words on the metallic plaque, Phase 1, Resonance Calibration, Project Chimera, echoed in the vast, humming silence of the chamber, a stark intrusion of modern ambition into a place that felt timeless. My initial sense of awe was now overlaid with a complex web of new questions and a creeping sense of disquiet. The Plains Infrastructure Consortium, with its bland name and its innocuous requests for utility mapping, was clearly a facade for something far more profound, far more clandestine. I stood there for a long time, the cool, vibrant air of the chamber washing over me, the rhythmic pulse of the luminous pillar, a steady heartbeat in the subterranean darkness. My flashlight beam traced the edges of the plaque again, as if trying to extract more information from its cold, metallic surface. Resonance, calibration. It implied they weren't just observing this place, they were attempting to interact with it, perhaps even to manipulate the energies I was only just beginning to perceive. And Project Chimera, a creature of myth, composed of disparate parts. What were they trying to build, or to fuse together, down here in the secret heart of the earth? My gaze drifted back to the offering bowls at the pillar's base, to the ammonites and the iridescent blue feathers. These felt like gestures of reverence, of a deep intuitive understanding. The consortium's plaque, by contrast, felt like an act of branding, of claiming ownership over something that could surely not be owned. The janitor, where did he fit into this? Was he a knowing participant in Project Chimera, his cryptic clues merely a more esoteric form of data gathering, designed to lead me, the specialist, to this exact spot so I could further their calibration efforts? Or was he a rogue element, someone who understood the true nature of this place and was trying to guide me towards a different kind of understanding, a more respectful engagement? His offerings felt like a gentle curriculum in an ancient wisdom, not items on a corporate checklist. The thought that he might be simply using me on behalf of the consortium left a sour taste. Yet the quiet dignity of his presence, the almost sacred way he tended to his duties in the world above, didn't align with the cold pragmatism implied by the plaque. Driven by a new urgency, I began a more careful examination of the chamber, my flashlight beam sweeping slowly across the curved walls, the floor, the area around the central pillar. I was looking for other signs of the consortium's presence, equipment, sensors, notations, anything that might betray the extent of their Phase 1. But the chamber was remarkably clean, almost pristine, apart from the plaque itself and the ancient offerings. It was as if the place itself resisted modern intrusion, or perhaps the consortium was being exceedingly careful, their presence meant to be almost invisible. The pillar itself drew me back. Its gentle luminosity pulsed with a life of its own, the intricate geometric patterns on its surface seeming to shift and reconfigure in the light. Like a complex silent language, I reached out a gloved hand, hesitantly, towards its crystalline surface. Before I made contact, I could feel a distinct sensation, a faint vibration, a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature, more like a field of pure vital energy. It was inviting, not aggressive. I touched the surface. It was smooth, like polished glass, yet it felt strangely organic, alive. The hum resonated through my fingertips, up my arm, into my core, a deeply soothing, clarifying sensation. It felt like remembering something I hadn't known I'd forgotten. I spent what felt like hours in that chamber, though my watch, when I eventually consulted it, suggested only one had passed. Time flowed differently here. I made sketches in my notebook of the pillar, the patterns, the chamber layout, the plaque. My cartographer's instinct to document, to map, was strong. But this was more than just a survey. It was a testament, a bearing witness. The realization settled upon me that my work was far from over. The map I was creating was no longer just for the consortium. It was for myself, and perhaps for the place itself. If they were indeed trying to calibrate or control these energies, I needed to understand what those energies were, what their natural state was. My initial skepticism about the airport's conspiracies had long since evaporated, replaced by a direct, tangible experience of something far stranger and more profound than any of the surface-level theories about lizard people or Illuminati bunkers. This was about the Earth itself, its ancient rhythms, its hidden power, and the audacity of those who sought to harness it without true understanding. The thought of returning to the surface, to my mundane office and my duplicitous employers, filled me with a quiet dread. How could I continue to feed them data, knowing what I now knew? How could I participate, even passively, in Project Chimera? As I prepared to leave, my flashlight beam caught something glinting near one of the offering bowls I hadn't inspected closely. It was another small metallic object. But this one was clearly not from the consortium. It was an old tarnished silver locket, intricately engraved with a spiral pattern almost identical to the ammonite and the sketch. It lay open, and on one side, tucked behind a faded piece of celluloid, was a miniature sepia-toned photograph of a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, her hair styled in a fashion from decades past. On the other side, a tiny folded piece of paper. With trembling fingers, I extracted the paper. It was old, brittle, and written in a faded spidery script were just 2 words. Listen deeper. The janitor. This had to be his. This locket, so personal, so intimate, was a profound gesture, a plea. It wasn't a corporate directive. It was a message from the heart, a clue to navigate, not just the physical space, but the ethical and spiritual labyrinth I had stumbled into. He wasn't part of Project Chimera, in the way I feared. He was trying to show me a different path, the path of respect, of understanding, not exploitation. The weight of that realization, the trust it implied, was immense. Listen deeper. The 2 words penned in that faded spidery script resonated within me far more profoundly than the thrumming of the crystalline pillar or the official pronouncements on the consortium's plaque. The locket felt warm in my palm, a tangible link to the janitor, to his silent wisdom, and to a lineage of guardianship I was only just beginning to comprehend. This wasn't merely an instruction, it was an invitation, a key to a different kind of perception. I carefully replaced the tiny note, closed the locket, and placed it reverently beside the ammonite and the blue feather I now carried in a small pouch in my jacket. These were my new cartographic tools, instruments for mapping a terrain not of geography, but of significance, of resonance. My decision was made, not in a flash of defiance, but as a quiet settling, like sediment finding its place at the bottom of a still pool. I could not, would not be an unwitting instrument for Project Chimera. My skills, my meticulous nature, my ability to see the patterns, these would now serve a different purpose. I would continue to map this place, but not for them. I would map it to understand, perhaps even to protect. Leaving the chamber felt different from entering it. The deep hum of the pillar, the pulsing light, the shimmering air. These were no longer just phenomena to be observed and recorded. They were elements of a living system, a sacred breathing entity. As I walked back up the gently sloping passage, my flashlight beam seemed almost superfluous. The faint geometric etchings on the stone walls now pulsed with a subtle luminescence of their own, visible only when I softened my gaze, when I listened with more than just my ears. They seemed to trace the flow of the energy that suffused this place, the very currents the janitor had guided me to perceive. The cool, vibrant air felt charged, not with electricity, but with information, with stories. I imagined generations of silent guardians treading this same path, their senses attuned to these subtle broadcasts from the earth. The janitor was one of them, and perhaps, in some small way, he was inviting me to become one too. Reaching the sealed panel, I paused. The world above, with its fluorescent lights, its political machinations, its endless noise, felt distant and harsh. Here, in the quiet hum of the earth's deep places, there was a profound sanity, a timeless order. With some effort, I slid the heavy stone plug back into place, the faint grating sound echoing briefly, before silence reclaimed the passage. I was back in the dusty utility closet, the mundane world reasserting itself. But I was changed. The airport around me, as I made my way back to my office in the pre-dawn gloom, was no longer just a marvel of engineering or a hub of human activity. It was a thin veneer, a modern construct laid carefully, or perhaps carelessly, over something far older, far more powerful. The floor patterns, the architectural alignments, the very placement of Blucifer on the plains, I saw them now not just as aesthetic choices or even subconscious echoes, but as potential dialogues, knowing or unknowing, with the resonant energies beneath. In my office, the blinking light of my computer monitor seemed particularly garish. The neat stacks of official reports and schematics felt like a kind of blindness. I sat for a long time, the silence of my small room amplifying the internal shift. How does one map a secret that wants to remain hidden from those who would exploit it? How does one use the tools of a system to subtly undermine that same system? Listen deeper. The janitor's message was the key. The consortium was listening for power, for usable data, for frequencies they could calibrate and control. I needed to listen for the meaning, for the purpose, for the interconnectedness of it all. My work for the consortium would have to continue, at least for a while. To abruptly resign or change my methods would raise suspicion. But the data I would provide them would be curated. The vital correlations, the true nexus points of the energy lines, the subtle indicators of the system's sentience, these would remain in my private maps, my shadow archive. I would feed them enough to keep them satisfied, enough to suggest progress, but I would steer them away from the heart, from the sanctum. It was a dangerous game, a tightrope walk between compliance and quiet rebellion. And I would seek out the janitor, not to confront him, or to ask for explicit instructions, but to learn, to observe his way of being in this place, his silent custodianship. His wisdom was not in words, but in gestures, in presence, in the gentle alignment of his being with the deeper rhythms of the earth. The first hint of dawn was painting the distant Colorado sky as I finally prepared to leave. I took the ammonite, the feather, and the locket from my pouch and placed them carefully in a hidden compartment in my surveyor's kit. They were my true north now. As I walked through the slowly awakening airport, I noticed the way the early morning light caught the sharp angles of Blucifer in the distance. Its blue hide seemed to absorb the nascent light, and for a moment, its fierce form looked less demonic and more like a powerful, enigmatic guardian of the threshold between the seen and the unseen. Perhaps even Blucifer was part of this ancient dialogue, its curse, a misunderstanding of its true role. The hum of the airport was all around me, but beneath it I could now feel another hum, deeper, more resonant, the song of the earth. And I, Elias Thorne, Cartographer of Whispers, knew my true work had just begun. The map was unfolding, vast and mysterious, and I was finally learning its true language. The days that followed my descent into the subterranean chamber were lived on two distinct levels. On the surface, I was Elias Thorne, the diligent GIS analyst, meticulously compiling datasets for the Plains Infrastructure Consortium. I attended the virtual meetings, submitted progress reports, and answered technical queries with my usual precision. My superiors seemed satisfied. The data I provided was accurate, detailed, and aligned with their projected parameters for Project Chimera, though they never used that name in our communications. They were, I sensed, pleased with the efficiency with which I was confirming their existing hypotheses about energy confluences and structural anomalies. They didn't know that the most significant discoveries, the true heart of the resonant map, were being carefully, painstakingly diverted into my private encrypted archive. This subtle subversion required an intense level of focus. I had to understand the consortium's expectations well enough to meet them superficially, while simultaneously identifying and protecting the truly sacred, the truly powerful aspects of the underground system. It was like navigating a minefield blindfolded, guided only by the faint hum of the earth and the cryptic wisdom gleaned from the janitor's symbolic offerings. My attempts to connect more directly with the janitor remained exercises in profound subtlety. I would leave small, almost imperceptible signs for him. A tiny, perfectly round pebble from a specific stratum I'd identified near a key energy line, placed discreetly on a ledge I knew he dusted. Or I would alter, by a mere fraction, the angle of a floor tile schematic on my monitor when I knew he might pass my open door, a visual nod to a pattern he might recognize from the chamber below. Sometimes, days later, I would find a response, a single dried prairie flower left on my chair, or a specific cleaning fluid used in my office that left a lingering scent of sage and pine, scents I associated with the clean, vibrant air of the passage. We were two cartographers speaking in a silent language of shared secrets, our dialogue woven into the mundane fabric of the airport's daily life. He never spoke a word to me, never made overt eye contact, yet our understanding deepened, a quiet alliance against the machinations of Project Chimera. Listen deeper. This became my guiding principle. I began to spend even more of my free time in the terminals, not just observing, but sensing. I would sit quietly in the great hall, near the capstone, feeling the subtle thrumming beneath the polished granite, a sensation that was now as familiar to me as my own pulse. I started to perceive variations in this energy, subtle shifts in its intensity and quality that seemed to correspond with the time of day, the weather patterns, even. I began to suspect, with the collective emotional state of the thousands of travelers passing through. The airport was not just built upon these energies, it was in constant dynamic dialogue with them. It was during one of these sessions of deep listening, while contemplating the chaotic, vibrant murals of Leo Tanguma, that a new layer of understanding began to unfold, the precursor to Twist 3. I had always been unsettled by the murals, by their depictions of destruction and rebirth. Now, with my heightened senses and my knowledge of the resonant chamber, I saw them differently. The swirling lines, the strange figures, the dramatic shifts in color and perspective, they weren't just allegories of worldly events. They were, I started to realize, visual representations of the energies themselves. They were maps of the unseen, depictions of the resonant frequencies that pulsed beneath the airport. One mural, in particular, the one depicting a great fiery sword cleaving a city, while children slept peacefully amidst the apparent chaos, surrounded by vibrant, almost psychedelic flora and fauna, began to resonate with a new clarity. The fiery sword wasn't necessarily an instrument of destruction. I saw it now as a powerful energy current, a specific frequency. The sleeping children weren't oblivious victims. They were perhaps individuals attuned to a different resonant state, sheltered within a protective harmonic. The vibrant, otherworldly plants and animals, were they symbols of different dimensions, different states of being, accessible through these energetic currents? The thought was staggering. What if the murals were more than just maps of the energy lines? What if they were guides, or even warnings, about how to navigate these frequencies? What if certain resonances, when activated or aligned, could create subtle rifts, temporal displacements, or even pathways to other states of perception, other realities? The new world the capstone spoke of might not be a new geopolitical order, but a gateway to entirely new worlds of experience, made accessible through the precise calibration of these ancient energies. This dawning realization cast Project Chimera in an even more dangerous light. If the consortium, with their purely technical approach, their desire to calibrate and control, were to stumble blindly into these deeper applications, the consequences were unimaginable. They were like children playing with matches in a storehouse of cosmic dynamite. Blucifer, too, took on a new significance in this light. Its imposing form, its piercing gaze, was it a guardian not just of the physical sight, but of these energetic pathways? Did its curse fall upon those who approached the airport's secrets with greed or ill intent, those who failed to listen deeper? The sculptor, Luis Jimenez, who died creating it, had he inadvertently activated something, or perhaps gotten too close to a dangerous, unstable resonance without the proper understanding or protection? The weight of my knowledge pressed down on me, yet it was a clarifying pressure. My role was becoming clearer. I wasn't just a passive observer or a reluctant saboteur. I was a student, a nascent guardian in my own right, tasked with understanding the true nature of this place, this incredible confluence of ancient wisdom and modern technology. The janitor was my teacher, the earth my guide, and the murals, it now seemed, were my textbooks. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril, but the quiet hum of the deep song urged me forward, into the heart of the mystery. The map was not just of lines and locations, but of consciousness itself. The murals became my new obsession, my new layer of cartographic study. No longer just unsettling art, they were complex schematics, rich with encoded information. I spent hours ostensibly on breaks, or during quiet periods of my official work, standing before them, my gaze soft, my mind open, trying to listen deeper to their silent narratives. I carried a high-resolution digital camera, taking detailed photographs of sections that resonated with my growing understanding, later overlaying them onto my private energy maps in my subterranean office. The correlations were astonishing. A particular shade of deep blue, used in one mural to depict a swirling vortex around serene figures, corresponded almost precisely with a specific very low-frequency energy signature I had detected near a quiet, unused gate in Concourse A. The depiction of jagged crystalline structures in another panel, through which light seemed to refract in unusual ways, aligned with an area above the subterranean chamber where my GPR had hinted at unusual geological formations, ones the consortium's initial surveys had dismissed as data noise. It was the janitor who provided the next piece of the puzzle, the next quiet affirmation. One morning, after I had spent a particularly intense late night studying a section of a mural that depicted what looked like a pathway of floating stones leading into a starlit sky, I found a small, smooth, dark river stone resting on the ammonite on my desk. It was unremarkable in itself, yet it was almost identical in shape and color to the floating stones in the mural. And on its underside, so faintly etched it was almost invisible, was a single tiny spiral, the same spiral from the first sketch he'd given me, the same spiral that adorned the ancient pillar. It was his way of saying, yes, you are on the right path. The stones, the stars, the spirals, they are all connected. The murals are a key. This new understanding infused my perception of the airport with an almost constant sense of wonder. The mundane architecture became a canvas, the everyday sounds a complex symphony of hidden frequencies. I started noticing how certain materials used in the airport's construction seemed to absorb or reflect the underlying energies in unique ways. The polished granite floors didn't just look elegant, they felt like subtle conductors. The vast expanses of glass in the Jeppesen terminal didn't just offer views of the planes and the sky. They acted as lenses, focusing or subtly altering the ambient energies. Even the controversial tent-like roof, designed to mimic the snow-capped Rocky Mountains, seemed to gather and distribute the telluric currents in a specific intentional manner. The entire airport, I realized, wasn't just built on a sacred site. It was a sacred site, a vast modern temple, unconsciously, or perhaps consciously designed to interact with the profound energies of the earth and sky. My official work for the plane's infrastructure consortium became a delicate dance of misdirection. I would highlight areas of potential interest for resonance calibration that I knew were energetically inert, or perhaps even subtly dissonant, steering their attention away from the true nexuses, the places where the murals hinted at pathways to deeper understanding or more significant energetic confluences. I felt a constant, low-level tension, the fear of discovery, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overridden by a profound sense of purpose. I was not just protecting a place, I was protecting a potential, a wisdom that humanity, in its current state of avarice and short-sightedness, was perhaps not yet ready to wield. The concept of temporal or dimensional shifts, as suggested by my interpretation of the murals, was something my rational mind still struggled with. Yet the more I attuned myself to the subtle energies, the more I felt the permeability of reality. There were moments, usually late at night when the airport was still and the energies were strong, when I would experience flickers, a momentary distortion in the air, a sound that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, a fleeting glimpse of a shadow moving in a way that defied conventional physics. These were never frightening, more like gentle reminders that the world was far stranger, far more layered than I had ever believed. The lines on my maps were not just delineating space, but perhaps also time and possibility. I began to document these fleeting experiences in my private journal, noting the corresponding energy readings, the specific mural panel I had been contemplating, the phase of the moon, the prevailing weather. I was a cartographer of the liminal, charting the borderlands of perception. The weight of this knowledge, this secret guardianship, was immense, yet it didn't crush me. Instead, it imbued my solitary existence with a profound sense of connection to the earth, to the silent janitor, to whatever ancient intelligence had first understood these energies. I was a single quiet note in a vast resonant song, and my task, I now understood, was to ensure that song was not silenced or distorted by those who could not hear its true melody. The ambiguity of the future, what the consortium might do, what these energies truly portended, remained. But within that ambiguity, there was also a sense of immense unfolding wonder. The map was leading me deeper still, not just into the earth, but into the very nature of reality itself. The quiet rhythm of my double life, official cartographer by day, secret guardian by night, was subtly disturbed by a shift in the communications from the plane's infrastructure consortium. Their requests for data became more specific, more urgent. They started asking for detailed resonance profiles of areas I had deliberately mapped as inert, cross-referencing them with solar flare activity and deep earth tremor data. They were narrowing their focus, honing in on something. Project Chimera, I sensed, was moving towards a new, more active phase. The thought sent a cold ripple of apprehension through me. My carefully constructed diversions might not hold them off indefinitely. This growing pressure from the consortium seemed to amplify the strange atmospheric effects I was experiencing. The flickers in reality became more pronounced, less easily dismissed. One late evening, as I was tracing the intricate lines of a mural depicting a starlit pathway, the same one the janitor had alluded to with the river stone, the air in my small office grew incredibly still. The familiar hum of the airport, usually a constant presence, faded into an absolute profound silence, as if the entire vast machinery of DIA had momentarily ceased to exist. For a few seconds, the fluorescent lights above me flickered and dimmed, and the image of the mural on my large monitor seemed to ripple, the starlit path glowing with an almost impossible depth, beckoning. I felt a distinct physical pull, a gentle but insistent tug, as if the mural were a doorway I could simply step through. The sensation passed as quickly as it came. The lights returned to their normal intensity. The hum of the airport slowly seeped back into my awareness, and the mural on my screen was once again a flat, static image. But the experience left me shaken, not with fear, but with a sense of awe and a dawning, terrifying understanding. The pathways depicted in the murals were not just symbolic, they were real, or at least potentially real, accessible under specific resonant conditions. The temporal or dimensional shifts I had theorized about were not abstract concepts, but tangible possibilities. The consortium, with their resonance calibration, was dabbling in forces that could literally reshape reality, perhaps without even grasping the true implications. The next morning, I encountered the janitor in a rarely used corridor near the international arrivals area. It was one of the few places where a large south-facing window allowed the early morning sun to stream in, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. He was standing by the window, not cleaning, but simply gazing out at the distant snow-capped peaks of the Rockies, his silhouette framed against the brilliant light. As I approached, he turned, and for the first time, his eyes met mine directly. There was no surprise in his gaze, only a deep, sorrowful knowing. He held out his hand, palm up. Resting on it was a single perfectly preserved autumn leaf, its colors a symphony of red and gold. He didn't speak, but his eyes conveyed a clear message: seasons turn, cycles complete, and some things, perhaps, cannot be held back forever. It felt like a warning, a farewell, or perhaps an acknowledgement of an impending crisis. He then closed his hand, nodded once, a gesture of profound shared understanding, and slowly walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the concourse. The encounter left me with a heavy heart. The subtle game we had been playing, the silent exchange of symbols, felt like it was drawing to a close. The time for mere observation and gentle misdirection might be over. I returned to my office, the image of the autumn leaf vivid in my mind. It spoke of change, of letting go, but also of the beauty inherent in natural cycles. Project Chimera was an attempt to force a cycle, to impose an artificial will upon something ancient and sacred. My private maps were now incredibly detailed, a complex tapestry of energy lines, resonant nodes, mural correlations, and personal observations. I had mapped the safe pathways, the harmonious frequencies, but I had also begun to identify the dissonant zones, the areas where the energies felt unstable, potentially dangerous, areas the consortium, in their ignorance, might be drawn to, mistaking power for potential. The weight of responsibility settled on me more heavily than ever. I was just one man, a cartographer, against a well-funded, technologically advanced organization. What could I realistically do to stop them, or to mitigate the potential damage? The ambiguous ending of my own personal map was fast approaching. I knew I had to make a choice, to move beyond passive resistance. The silent song of the earth, which had become so familiar, now carried an undertone of urgency, a plea for conscious, careful stewardship. The airport, this magnificent, terrible, beautiful enigma, held its breath, waiting, and I, its unlikely confidant, had to decide how to answer its silent call. The autumn leaf the janitor had given me lay on my desk, a small, vibrant flame against the cool gray of the formica. It was a memento mori, perhaps, a reminder of impermanence, but also a symbol of the natural order, of the beauty in yielding to forces greater than oneself. The consortium, in its hubris, sought to command those forces. My task, I realized, was not to command either, but to harmonize, to nudge, to gently guide. The urgency from Project Chimera's communications was palpable now. They were requesting final verifications on a series of coordinates that my private maps showed were dangerously close to an unstable resonant node, a place where the murals hinted at chaotic, unpredictable energies. It was clear they believed they were on the cusp of a breakthrough, a significant activation. I knew that a direct refusal or obvious sabotage would expose me and likely achieve nothing beyond my immediate removal. Instead, I chose a different path, a path of subtle cartographic alchemy, drawing on all my knowledge of the airport's energetic architecture, the wisdom gleaned from the janitor's silent teachings, and the profound understanding gifted to me in the subterranean chamber. I began to recalibrate the data I was feeding the consortium. It wasn't falsification, not exactly. It was a reinterpretation. I subtly amplified the resonance signatures of benign, stable locations, making them appear more promising, more aligned with the consortium's desired parameters. Simultaneously, I introduced minute, almost imperceptible data static, tiny plausible inconsistencies into the readings from the truly critical, volatile areas they were targeting, making them seem less reliable, more problematic for their calibration. It was the most complex, most demanding cartographic work of my life. Every line, every data point, every subtle annotation was a careful choice, a whispered suggestion to the consortium's algorithms and analysts. I was attempting to gently steer a colossal, blindfolded beast away from a precipice, using only the faintest of breezes, the most subtle of scents, I worked for days, fueled by a quiet intensity, the hum of the airport, a constant, supportive presence. The janitor I saw, no more. His visible role, it seemed, was complete, but his influence was everywhere. In the locket I wore beneath my shirt, in the wisdom of the murals, in the very air I breathed. On the day I submitted my final, meticulously crafted dataset to the consortium, a profound sense of calm settled over me. I had done what I could. The outcome was uncertain, but I had acted in accordance with the deeper truths I had discovered. I had listened as deeply as I knew how. The days that followed were quiet. The urgent demands from the consortium ceased. Their communications became sparse, then stopped altogether. I continued my official duties, maintaining the facade, but I sensed a change. Had my subtle interventions worked? Had they been diverted, their project stalled or redirected towards less critical pathways? Or had they achieved some form of activation, the results of which were perhaps too subtle or too strange to be immediately apparent? I didn't know. The airport held its secrets close. My own explorations continued, but they were different now, less driven by a need to uncover, more by a desire to simply be in dialogue with the place. I would walk the terminals, feeling the ebb and flow of the energies, observing the subtle play of light and shadow, the way the murals seemed to shift and whisper in the quiet hours. The flickers in reality still occurred, but I no longer saw them as glitches. They were glimpses, invitations into the vast, layered mystery of existence. The subterranean chamber, the luminous pillar, the ancient song. I knew the way back, but I felt no immediate need to return. Its presence was a constant in my awareness, a deep well of peace and understanding I could access from anywhere within the airport's energetic embrace. My work as a cartographer had been transformed. I was no longer just mapping the physical world. I was charting the liminal spaces, the resonant pathways, the hidden currents that connect all things. My maps were no longer for clients or corporations, but for myself, and perhaps for a future when humanity might be ready to approach such knowledge with wisdom and reverence. The Planes Infrastructure Consortium eventually terminated my contract, citing project recalibration and budgetary adjustments. It was a quiet, anticlimactic end to my official role. I packed my few belongings, my official datasets handed over, my shadow maps safely secured. As I left Denver International Airport for what I knew would not be the last time, I paused on the high plains, looking back at its iconic tinted silhouette against the vast Colorado sky. Blucifer stood sentinel in the distance, its form no longer demonic to my eyes, but profoundly, mysteriously itself. A guardian of thresholds, a marker of unseen realities. The wind whispered around me, carrying the faint, distant hum of the airport, and beneath it, the deeper resonant song of the earth. I didn't know what the future held for Project Chimera, or for the airport's ancient secrets, but I knew that the land remembered, and I knew that I, Elias Thorne, would continue to listen, to map, to wonder. The lines of the world, seen and unseen, stretched out before me, an endless unfolding mystery, and somewhere, in the quiet hum of it all, I felt a sense of peace, a sense that my small part in its vast, intricate design was perhaps just beginning. The sky, I noticed, seemed a little bluer than it used to, the silence between sounds a little more profound. Or perhaps I had simply learned to see and to hear with new senses. The greatest maps, after all, are not of places, but of perception.